Today I'm going to try to make a whole pizza for just $1, but I have a few rules that I want to follow for this challenge. The first is that I'm only going to count the actual ingredients that I use. So if I buy a whole bag of flour, for example, which I will have to, I'm only going to count the quantity that I actually use. With that said though, I'm not going to buy things in massive industrial sized quantities that the average home cook wouldn't buy. I'm only going to be shopping at everyday grocery stores. And really there are two places that I think I'm going to find the best deals. So at Walmart, I started in the baking aisle. And considering that flour will make up the majority of this recipe, that was my first priority. So this King Arthur all-purpose that I usually use is about $9.98 for 10 pounds, whereas the Walmart brand here is $4.34 for 10 pounds. Very big difference. Now they also had some Walmart, aka Great Value brand bread flour, which would have a slightly higher protein content than all-purpose, but it was also nearly double the price, so I didn't bother with that. Then next I hit the sugar section, and for me I've never noticed a difference between name brands versus generic when it comes to sugar. So I picked up the Walmart Great Value brand for a little less than 5 cents per ounce. This isn't sponsored by Walmart, by the way. I have no affiliation with them, but they do have some pretty good deals sometimes. Same thing with salt. The brand shouldn't really matter, so I just grabbed the cheapest non-iodized salt I could find. Then to finish off the dough ingredients, I grabbed some instant yeast, and I went with the jar rather than the packets because it's just a better value. Anyways, after that, it was time for the fun part, starting with the tomatoes. So they have the red pack that I often get. $1.96. They're not my favorites these days, but they are pretty good. But if I go with the Walmart brand, get them for $1.52. So I think I'm gonna go with those for today. But now it's time for the hardest part. Cheese. And when it comes to pizza cheese, I'm usually looking for one main thing, and that is a good low moisture mozzarella, preferably whole milk mozzarella as opposed to part skim. That might be pushing it a bit for this challenge since whole milk mozzarella is usually pretty hard to find. So first I checked out the deli section, and they had lots of nice cheeses like cheddar, Swiss, Munster, and Colby Jack, but they were all around like $7 a pound or more. They even had some fresh mozzarella, but still none of the low moisture stuff that I was looking for. So next I headed to what I call the mass-produced cheese section, which is where you'll find all the name brand stuff, string cheeses, low quality pre-shredded cheeses, and so on. But that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the generic whole block cheeses. And sure enough, my old friend Great Value came through for me yet again. First I found a 2-pound pack of low moisture mozzarella for just $3.66 a pound, but as I kept looking, I then found a 1-pound pack for $3.68 a pound, which to me, to not have to buy 2 whole pounds of cheese was worth the extra 2 cents a pound. Now it is part skim mozzarella, but for this challenge, I was happy just to find any decent looking mozzarella at a reasonable price. And they actually had several other cheeses to choose from at that exact same $3.68 per pound price point. So I also picked up some Monterey Jack, which I may try blending in with my mozzarella to add some extra flavor. But just as I was about to leave, feeling pretty satisfied, I found one more thing. Whole milk mozzarella. This must be new because I wasn't able to find this when I was doing my New York style pizza series. Definitely seems to be like a little moister than your typical low moisture cheese. It actually doesn't say whether it is low moisture. It doesn't seem to be like fully fresh though, so we'll give it a try. So I got some fairly decent deals here at Walmart, but I didn't want to stop quite yet. There was still one other store I wanted to pay a visit to, which I think I may have even better luck at. So at Aldi, I first looked at the flour, and it's about the same price as Walmart, so I'll pass. Sugar, same deal, but salt, wow, this is pretty cheap. Just 64 cents for the same size pack that I paid $1.46 for at Walmart. This Aldi salt is iodized though, and for making dough, I prefer to use a pure salt. They do have good deals on oil as well, which could be a way to take this pizza dough to the next level, but I want to make this as cheap as possible, so I'm gonna pass on that too. But in this same aisle is something that I forgot to look for at Walmart, and that is some spices for the sauce. Often I'll use things like oregano, thyme, or garlic powder in my pizza sauce, but in order to pack the most flavor in without buying a bunch of different spices, I think I'll just go with this Italian seasoning. Now heading over to the sauce aisle, it looks like my luck here at Aldi might be changing. They have a can of crushed tomatoes for just $1.39, even cheaper than the $1.52 that I paid at Walmart. So I'll get a couple cans of these and then head to the cheese. So it looks like as far as the basic cheeses, Aldi really doesn't have anything cheaper than Walmart. If anything, it's about the same price. I don't know how the quality would compare, but I think I'm gonna hold off for now. If I did want to kind of upgrade this pizza a little bit with some different cheeses though, this would be a good place. They have like this Havarti, which is about the same price as mozzarella. We got Monterey Jack, cheddar, Asiago. a lot of sort of different cheeses. For this challenge though, I think I want to stick with the basics. I think I will get this Havarti. Also got some sliced provolone, but I think it should help me to upgrade this pizza a little bit without spending too much more. So let's get started. And now that we got all of our ingredients, we can work on this recipe. So this is something I use for most of my pizza recipes, especially when I'm doing my pizza pop-ups. And it's also something that you'll get access to if you join my dough mastery workshop. But basically what it is number one, it's a recipe spreadsheet. I've also got a testing log on here so I can track my experimentation and my results. And then I have a sheet where I can track my ingredients. And once I've got the costs entered here for the specific ingredient that I use, I can change the pizza size, change the topping amounts, dough recipe, and it'll automatically calculate the new cost to make that pizza. So what I'm gonna start with here is a 13-inch pizza. If I can make it bigger, I will, but obviously that would also make the pizza more expensive. We'll just start with a generic recipe here. My main flour in this case is gonna be all-purpose. We'll start with 65% hydration, 2.5% salt, 0.5% yeast, no diastatic malt powder just to save on cost. But instead, to help with the browning, I am gonna use a little bit of sugar. I'll start with 2%. Even though that adds a little bit to the cost, I really think it's gonna make a big difference because in a home oven, when you're baking at lower temperatures, it helps to have something to help with that browning. Now I'll also start with just my standard topping amounts. Based on my New York style recipe, this is a medium sauce, medium cheese. Now what I have to do is enter all of my ingredients that I bought and the cost of each one. And it's all pretty straightforward. You just take the price you paid for the ingredient and then enter the weight in grams of that ingredient, which is always going to be listed on the package. And the spreadsheet will calculate the price per gram that you're paying. And then it'll also give you the price per pizza that you're paying based on how many grams you're using on this recipe spreadsheet. So that brings my dough cost so far to only 26 cents. That's pretty good. But of course the cheese is usually the most expensive part of the pizza. So let's see what we're working with. So that's already $1 worth of cheese for one pizza, which brings us to $1.27. I do want to keep this under $1, so I'll probably mess with the amount of cheese that I use. But before I start messing with the recipe, let's input the rest of the things. And of course you don't have to add the sugar or Italian seasoning to the sauce, for example, but that's just something that I think is going to take it to the next level without adding too much cost. But as we can see, I've got everything entered into the spreadsheet here. Let me just hide these extra rows. And the pizza is already up to $1.50. I mean, definitely not bad, but I really want to get this under $1. Now, I mean, really the main limiting factor here is the cheese. I mean, we've got $1 worth of mozzarella on here. But again, like we talked about before, this is based on medium cheese and medium sauce, which some people might like, but actually when I make this pizza for myself, I usually go with low cheese and medium sauce, which brings us down to 103 grams of cheese, down from 121, which is only going to cost me 85 cents as opposed to $1. Still a little bit higher than where I want to be. So let me take another look here. All right, yeah, I mean 97 grams, we'll start with that. I think it's going to be more of like a margarita pizza where, you know, definitely a lot more sauce than cheese. But personally, again, that's kind of how I like it. If it really doesn't work out, we can change that. But one other thing I'm thinking of, but the higher the hydration we go, the less the dough is going to cost us to make because it's more water as opposed to actual dough. What happens if we bring it up to 70% hydration? It only brings the dough cost down by 1 cent. So it's not really a super effective way to reduce the cost. Just performance wise, I do kind of like around a 70% hydration for this style of pizza that I'm gonna make. So I think that's what I'll go with. However, with all that, I'm still at $1.26. So let's see if we try bringing it down to 11 inches. All right, 11 inches, that gets us down to 88 cents. So let's see how big we can make this. 11 and a half, 97 cents. You know, I'm happy with that. I'm not gonna do like 11.625 inches. We'll just go with 11 and a half. But I'll also make a few dough balls so that I can play around with the different ratios of cheese to sauce, just in case this turns out to be way too little cheese, or even if I can reduce it further and then maybe make a bigger pizza. So let's get started. But first, a quick word from this video's sponsor, Manukora. Manukora makes Manuka honey, a single origin honey from New Zealand where the bees only feed on the nectar of one specific type of tree, the Manuka tea tree. And the result is basically honey with superpowers. The texture, color, and nutritional benefits are unlike anything you can buy off the shelf. So here I've got their 850 plus MGO Manuka honey, which is their best selling product. It has this creamy caramel texture that melts in your mouth, and it's got a super nice herbaceous taste, which is honestly good enough to eat by the spoonful. But you can also use this the same way you would any other honey. So I'll drizzle it over my yogurt or oatmeal in the morning, stir it into my tea, or even drizzle it over top of a pepperoni pizza, because the sweetness really nicely complements the salty saltiness of the pepperonis. But with Manuka honey, you don't have to choose between sweet and healthy. It's over 100 times richer in antioxidants than your average honey, one of which is MGO, which is a natural antibacterial compound that aids in gut and immune health, and it only comes from the nectar of this specific tea tree. So right now, if you head to manukora.com/Charlie, you can get $25 off their starter kit, which comes with the 850 plus MGO Manuka honey, along with a free travel pack of honey sticks, a free wooden spoon, and also a free guidebook. That's manukora.com/Charlie to get $25 off your starter kit. Thanks again to Manukora for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now, let's make this dough. And to make the dough, I'm following a pretty standard process. So I'll take my Great Value flour and add it to a bowl along with my yeast, salt, and sugar, before adding my water, again at a hydration level of 70%. Then I'll give that a good thorough stir with my dough whisk and a few little kneads with my hand like so, until everything is fully incorporated. Then I'll just cover that and let it rest for about 30 minutes to allow the gluten to start to develop, at which point it'll be a lot easier to work with. So I'll give it a few more kneads in the bowl, and since it isn't an extremely high hydration, I can also bring it out to my counter for a few kneads as well. Once it gets a little too sticky, I'll just transfer it to a separate clear container, and I'll let it rest there for about another 30 minutes. And by this point, the dough is nice and smooth, and it's just barely risen by about 10 to maybe 25%. So I'm gonna go ahead and transfer it right to my fridge. Then about 24 hours later, I'll bring it back out so that I can ball it up before returning it to the fridge for the rest of the fermentation. And this is generally the process I like to follow for sort of mid-hydration doughs like this, which is something that I get into a lot more detail in my new Pizza Dough Mastery workshop, which, in case you haven't heard me talk about it yet, is a dough handling workshop that I've been working on for a little while. It's actually launching right now. In fact, the first lessons just went live today. In it, I basically walk through the entire dough making process, from the recipe to the fermentation to the shaping and stretching techniques, in order to help you avoid all the most common dough making mistakes. So I won't go into a ton of detail here because I've already talked about it on the channel. I'll leave the link below, but if you do want to get in on the live Q&A for everyone who signs up within the first week of the workshop, you only have about 3 days left as of the filming of this video. The recording of the workshop will still be available after, but you just won't have the opportunity to get your personalized questions answered. Anyways, like I've said, after I balled up the dough and put it into the fridge for another 24 hours, I'll bring it back out and let it warm up to room temperature to get ready for baking, at which point we can work on the sauce. But we need to start by figuring out which brand of tomatoes we're going to use. And originally I was just going to do a taste test of my two budget brands compared to the brand that I usually use, just to see how they stack up. But it's been a while since I've done one of these tomato taste tests. You might have seen the last one during my New York style pizza series, but that was filmed over a year ago now. And I found a lot of new good tomato brands since then. So these are all mixed up, so I have no idea which is which. And they've all also been blended just to get them all to the same consistency. But the brands I'm using here are, of course, my two brands in question, Great Value, which is Walmart brand, and Happy Harvest, which is the Aldi brand, Jersey Fresh, Alta Cucina, which are my current favorites, Cento all-in-ones, Bianco di Napoli whole peeled tomatoes, and Sclafani. And I have my labels on the bottoms of all these containers, and I'm gonna rank them from best on this side to worst on this side. Now to prevent cross-contamination here. Those are not that good. Already I'm gonna assume this is one of the budget brands. Definitely not my favorite. Pretty sure these are the Alta Cucinas. This is what I use for my pop-ups, and actually at the pizzeria I work at, we recently started using these too. So maybe it's just my personal taste, but I really like the flavor of these. Super bright. It's got a nice balance between the acidity and the sweetness. They are a little liquidy, but by the time they're baked down on the pizza, it brings them to the perfect consistency in my opinion. So let's just make sure that we got this lineup dialed in. Yeah, I mean, no question, these are the Alta Cucinas. For me personally, these are a little more acidic, a little more flavorful, so I'm gonna put these at number 3. These two to me are definitely the best. I mean, Alta Cucinas to me are like the perfect tomato. These ones have a really nice real tomato taste to them and pretty bright, flavorful as well. Nice balance between the sweetness and the acidity. And this one, similar flavor profile to this, but I would say just a little bit more tamed down. This one I would say is exactly middle of the road. I wouldn't quite put it in the low tier, but I also wouldn't put it in the high tier. It's kind of diluted, but it has a good flavor balance. And if I had to use these, I'd be pretty happy with them. After tasting these again though, these two two are definitely in a tier of their own, being the worst. They just have that really artificial, just really diluted, not great taste to them. And while this one isn't quite as bad, it's definitely not my favorite. So I feel pretty confident in this lineup. Let's see what we're working with. Just as I expected, Alta Cucina. See what this one is. Interesting. So this is the Cento all-in-ones. And I had said in a previous video that was my favorite retail brand. I also recently said I like Jersey Fresh, so we'll see where that comes in. Interesting. So this is actually the Happy Harvest, the Aldi brand. And that was the cheapest of all of these tomatoes. So that's actually a surprisingly nice result there. Came in at $1.39 a can. Yeah, and they've got a really nice flavor to them. So let's see what this middle option is here. Bianco di Napoli, all right. I expected those to be pretty high up. The main disadvantage being they are really expensive, usually between like $4 to $5 a can. Not quite as acidic as some of these other options, but if you really want something a little bit sweeter and just, again, with that real tomato taste, these are a pretty good option. Yeah, so these are the Jersey Fresh. I guess testing them side by side with the rest of these, they're not like amazing tier tomatoes, but at the same time, I'm comparing these with the best of the best that I found, so could still definitely use these on a pizza and be satisfied. These two, however, I definitely wouldn't recommend using. First one, Sclafani. Interesting. This is another one that a while ago I mentioned that I liked at one point. I did notice they had a lot of seeds in them, which was kind of my main gripe, and maybe that's where I'm getting kind of that weird artificial kind of bitterness to them. Some people say when you blend seeds into a sauce, you get some bitterness. I really wasn't detecting that in any of these, but maybe just because these had so many seeds, that's what it did. Now the worst of them all, Great Value, Walmart brand. Kind of what you'd expect, I think. I was surprised that the Aldi ones were so much better, but I mean, it's Walmart, so don't get me wrong. I mean, Walmart has a lot of good deals, but their Great Value brand, I feel like can be kind of hit or miss on some things. So anyways, with all that, I'm very curious to see how these Aldi tomatoes work out on the pizza. So let's make some sauce. And the sauce really couldn't be too much simpler to make. I'm just gonna use a raw, sort of New York inspired sauce. So I'm taking my Aldi tomatoes and just adding 5 grams of salt, 12 grams of sugar, and 1.5 teaspoons of my Italian seasoning, and then blending that all up. And that's all there is to it. This will last for at least a few days in the fridge, so I'm gonna throw it in there until I'm ready to use it. And at this point, the only thing we still need to figure out is the cheese. And for that, I need to do a little testing. Alright, so I've got one pizza in the oven already, but before we talk about this process, we need to talk about the cheese, because that's the one thing we haven't covered yet. And if you remember from my New York style pizza series, you know that there are a few different types of mozzarella. Number one, there's low moisture versus fresh. For more New York style pizzas, we typically want to use low moisture, but there's another pretty significant distinction, and that is between part skim mozzarella versus whole milk mozzarella. And just as you might expect, whole milk mozzarella has a much richer consistency and a lot better flavor. It's actually quite a bit bigger difference than you might even expect. So I was really lucky that at Walmart I was able to find a whole milk mozzarella. But what I noticed about it as I started grating it is that it definitely had more of a fresh feel to it. I mean, it wasn't like quite as soft as a fresh mozzarella, but it definitely wasn't as rigid and low moisture as your typical low moisture mozzarella. Now, of course, I was also able to find your typical part skim mozzarella, and they were about the same price. So I guess I'm saying all this to say, this first pizza that I baked is really just a comparison between those two different cheeses, so that once I determine which one I like better, I can build my final cheese blend around that. And as we wait for this to cool, let's just talk about the other cheeses that I was able to find. Unfortunately, they all ended up to be right around the same price, so I can pretty much build whatever blend I want without affecting the final price of the pizza. So from Walmart, I picked up this Monterey Jack, which I've tried on pizzas in the past. It has a nice tangy, cheesy flavor, but you do have to blend it in with mozzarella if you want to achieve the proper kind of gooey, stretchy cheese texture. Now I also picked up some provolone and some Havarti, both of which already came sliced. And by the way, for the other ones, rather than grating them small like you typically see on a pizza, when I'm using a little bit less cheese like I'm doing here, I like to cut them into bigger slices. That way they just melt a little bit more slowly and kind of prevents them from getting lost in the sauce, so to speak. Now Havarti, I've actually never tried on a pizza, and just based on the raw texture, I'm assuming it's gonna melt a little bit better than something like the Monterey Jack. Now with all that said, let's compare these two different mozzarellas and see what we're working with. On this side here, we've got the part skim. On this side here, we've got the whole milk. And first of all, I gotta say, I mean, I'm actually really impressed with how this pizza turned out just visually. So let's give it a try. Whole milk, part skim. Yeah, so I think overall, even though the whole milk cheese maybe tastes a little bit better, it doesn't have that great of a texture, just because it does kind of resemble more of a fresh mozzarella. I mean, fresh mozzarella is really meant to be baked for 90 seconds, maybe a maximum of like 2.5 minutes, whereas this pizza was baked for about 5 minutes. And when you bake fresh mozzarella for that long, it becomes pretty rubbery and just kind of falls off the pizza when you bite into it. This Walmart brand part skim actually didn't have too bad of a flavor to it, and you can tell just by looking at the pizza, it melted a lot better, and overall just created a more desirable result. So with that out of the way, let's try to make this ultimate pizza here. So as usual, I baked on my preheated baking steel at my oven's highest temperature, and after 3 minutes, I rotated the pizza and turned on the broiler to get some extra browning on top. And after about 2 more minutes, the pizza was done. All right, so pretty good looking pizza here. But not only do we have this pizza, but what I did was make one of my signature recipe that I use for my pop-up, kind of a no expenses spared pizza, just for the sake of comparison, because I know this is a recipe that I like, so I'm really curious to see how it compares to this one. And you can see they look pretty different just looking at them. So again, this one costs 97 cents to make, whereas this one costs about $2.31 according to my calculations. Mainly because I use higher quality flours, a couple higher quality cheeses, some Parmigiano Reggiano, and obviously some basil on top as well. What I want to know though is it actually worth it to spend that much more? I mean, this actually is a really good pizza. Like, I mean, you can kind of tell just visually, but I'm really impressed with how this flour performed. Got some really nice charring and browning, nice crispness on the bottom. I will say the texture's a little bit tougher, not quite as tender as what I like. But I mean, for 97 cents, I'm super impressed with this pizza. Obviously, no complaints with the sauce, considering how good those tomatoes are. And I actually really like that Havarti cheese as well. I could tell it had a little bit more of an orangey look, so it does seem to kind of be one of those cheeses that separates a little bit more, rather than becoming kind of gooey and stretchy as it melts. But now let's compare this to my pizza here. Okay. I mean, it's a good pizza. That's why my pop-up is called Good Pizza. But yeah, I mean, obviously I put a ton of time and effort into picking the best ingredients, dialing in the process here. The dough texture is a lot better, a lot more tender. There's no question I do like this one better. I probably could have baked it a little bit darker, to be honest. I think that's kind of where the main visual difference between these two comes in. This one I did bake a little bit more well done. But I mean, those Alta Cucina tomatoes really just take it to the next level. Using a proper full-fat mozzarella. Again, the Parmigiano and basil, personally I really like, although that may not be for everybody. So for less than half the price though, I'm super happy with this. I honestly thought we were gonna kind of end up with some sort of abomination, just trying to use the cheapest ingredients possible. If any of my local pizzerias sold something like this, I would buy this any day. And I think it just goes to show that really the process itself is way more important than the actual recipe you use. I mean, obviously high quality ingredients are important, but you can absolutely bake a great pizza even on a tight budget. And this really wasn't meant to be any sort of promotion for my workshop, because honestly I didn't think this was going to turn out as well as it did. If I can make a great pizza using Walmart and Aldi ingredients, then you can too with the right knowledge and just a little bit of practice. So my goal with this workshop is to save you some time so you don't have to go through that same struggle. So you can check it out via the link in the description below. And if you're curious to learn a little bit more about my pizza pop-ups, you can check out this video right here where I initially tested out the oven that I'm now currently using for them. So either way, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next one.